Welcome, everyone. We're going to be talking about how a book can create and foster social change and help you leave a lasting legacy for the causes that you truly believe in. My guest today is my longtime friend, Shel Horowitz. How are you doing today, Shel?
Just great, Dan. Good to be here.
Shel, you are the person I know who has a true mission statement, who lives by a mission statement. Tell us, how can books and businesses help to make the world a better place?
That's a great question, but since you brought up my mission, I think I should give that context first. And my mission is to help companies and organizations find the sweet spot where profitability intersects social change and environmental healing, and to do this through their products and services as opposed to, for example, their charity. So how a book can foster a movement? Let's look at some history here. Okay, let's think about the movement against slavery in the United States. And let's think about Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe, which came out, I think, in the 1850s. Let's talk about the environmental movement, and would it even exist without Rachel Carson and her book Silent Spring from the early 60s, 1960s this time. There are so many books that have sparked new ways of thinking. Much more recently, there's, I actually think her TED Talk is a more accessible path than her book, but there's a book called Biomimicry by Janine Benyus, and it's a different spelling of Janine. It's JANINEBENYUS. Watch the TED Talk before you try the book. But this is the idea that we can model from nature, that nature has figured out solutions to all of our environmental problems and has done so with a zero waste model for tens of thousands of years. So by figuring out how nature is doing this, by looking at how the Namib desert beetle can extract water from places that don't seem to have any water, or how there are natural swales in India that allow, when you get a year of rain in a single month in the monsoon, and then it's dry the rest of the year, that it channels the water into essentially reservoirs where it can be drawn on all during that dry time. So we need to learn how to do these things. We need to learn, if we want to think about how to attach things to surfaces that are not necessarily horizontal. We can look at the feet of a gecko, lizard, which can walk on a ceiling. So there are thousands and thousands of examples of how we can use this. And I find that very, very exciting. I find that looking holistically, looking at books going way back to about 1975 or 1978, a man named Amory Lovins did a book called Soft Energy Paths. He's gone on to do many, many other books, Reinventing Fire, Natural Capitalism, bunch of stuff. And that was really all about the transition to green energy. Keep in mind, this was the 1970s. Most people didn't even know this existed yet. And society was far from being catalyzed around it. I think that one of the reasons we did get catalyzed is because of that book. Ralph Nader, people might not realize that Ralph Nader's first brush with fame was when he wrote a book called Unsafe at Any Speed, which was an expose of the lack of safety in automobiles, and particularly one called the Corvair, which was kind of a cool car. It had a rear engine, but it was not designed to protect the driver and the passengers very well. So that was his first real movement that he got involved with before he was doing nuclear power, before he was doing fair elections. And incidentally, when I wrote my own book on why nuclear power is a terrible idea, his was one of several books that I used in my research.
Excellent. That's a great history. Tell us how you've used your books to help further movements that you believe in.
Okay. Well, the most current one is Guerrilla Marketing to Heal the World, published by Morgan James. And this is all about the idea that I was talking about, that business can not only be an agent of social change and environmental healing, but it can make money doing so by developing products and services. And the research that I did for this book shows me over and over again that it is profitable, that people are much more likely to do business with a socially conscious company, that people are much more likely to want to stay employed by such a company, that people are much more likely to tell their friends and their neighbors and their 50,000 social media connections. And it goes on and on. And there are a lot of reasons why this is true. for one thing, you have been in marketing long enough that this will not come as a surprise to you, but it might come as a surprise to some of the people watching and listening here, that most companies spend nearly all of their marketing energy on bringing in new customers or new clients. And the smart ones go back to the well, because it actually costs, depending on which studies you believe, anywhere between 5 and 10 times as much to bring in a new client through traditional marketing as it does to bring back an existing one. And even better is if you have bringing in new clients through referral business. That costs you nothing, or maybe it costs you a small commission, but you're not paying upfront to get people in the door. They're coming to you, and not only are they coming to you, but they're coming to you with the idea predisposed that they want to do business with you. You've been recommended by somebody they trust. So when you do these things, and when you think about how the companies that go for the one-time sale and then burn their customers, they don't get sale number 2. They're going right back to the beginning and having to reinvent another process for bringing in another somebody who's going to fall for whatever it is that they're scamming. It's not a sustainable business model. So sustainability in business, not talking now about the green piece of sustainability, but about financial viability, involves repeat customer base. It involves lifetime customer value.
So as an author, how do you do your research for these kinds of books?
Well, a lot of times I will write the thing that I want to be true, and then I'll hunt around to see if in fact it is true.
Marvelous. I love that.
And my good friend Google helps me with this. But if I want to say, I'll just find an example in the book. Give me a second here. I know approximately where to find them. Okay, so for example, I had a thesis that customers were going to want to buy from companies that support their social agenda. So here we are on page 8 and 9 of the book, and I found a study by Tiller LLC, which is not a company I'm familiar with. The footnote is nationwide survey finds Americans believe environmental issues pose greater long-term threat to their health and well-being than terrorism or global epidemics. This was pre-COVID. And then I list the press release that I found. But I note that 83% of Americans, according to this study, are seeking opportunities to go greener. 85% want to leave the world greener for their children. 90% feel recycling and conservation are important. And 60% are worried about a major environmental catastrophe in the future. And 78% want corporations to adopt green behaviors. And 72% aren't even that fussy about why they're going green. So that means, for example, a company like Walmart, which is very green for reasons that have very little to do with its concern for the environment and very much to do with its concern for profitability. I'm in favor of that. They may be green for reasons that are not the reasons that I would want to go green, but I totally support and understand that they have done more to green the supply chain than all my writing and speaking and consulting will ever do, even if I had 5 lifetimes.
Okay, so let's take the book from there. You've written the book. How do you make an impact in the world with the book?
Well, you use the book to leverage media appearances, including what we're doing right here on this podcast. You use the book as a source of establishing your own expertise. So when you use a service like your own service about finding reporters, or you use Help a Reporter or whatever way you get there, you get in front of reporters who need story sources. And you say, I'm the author of this book. And here in my research, I discovered X, Y, and Z. You use the book as a platform for gaining speeches. If you're lucky, you'll even get paid for the speeches. But even if you're not, you're able to get in front of influencers. I once spoke at a conference of major magazine editors. That was an audience that I'm not going to get in front of as Joe Schmo from a farmhouse in Hadley, Massachusetts. But as author of a book that's been published, and even some books that were published by companies that people have heard of, there's credibility there that nobody can ever take away. And it opens a lot of doors. Now, and also, one last piece of it is you can use the book as a credential when you're trying to interview experts.
Good point. I noticed that you went with a publisher, Morgan James, and I love them. They send a lot of business my way, and David Hancock is like a superb, wonderful human being. So I can easily see why you went with them. I'm curious. There are a lot of people in my community believe in self-publishing. I'm wondering if you would advise them to do self-publishing or to go to a company like Morgan James or someone else. What would the advantages and disadvantages be for a socially conscious author?
Well, the two big advantages of going self-pub is, number one, you totally control the content. And number two, you will be taken seriously if you're reasonably successful. You can then go back to New York and do a new book, perhaps a new title, perhaps the same title. I just happen to have here some examples of how that works. This was my 2003 original book on ethical, green, and social change business practices, principled profit marketing that puts people first. This was published by me. Okay, that was 2003. In 2009, I think it was, a friend of mine who was an author for John Wiley and Sons just happened to say one morning in my email, "Hey, how would you like the name of my editor at Wiley?" As you can imagine, it took about 9 nanoseconds to say, yeah. So I got the idea while I was waiting for Wiley. I had pitched them on bringing a new edition of that self-published book into print. And then I got the bright idea that if Wiley said no, I could ask J. Conrad Levinson if he wanted to make this a guerrilla marketing book. And then I got the even brighter idea that if Wiley said yes, I could still ask Jay. And after about 2 months, Wiley did say yes. And I said to them, what do you think if I invite Jay Levinson to be part of this project? And they're like, oh, you mean we get 2 marketing gurus on the same? Yeah, I think we like that. So in 2010, John Wiley and Sons did my first guerrilla book, Guerrilla Marketing Goes Green, co-authored nominally with the late J. Conrad Levinson. And this being a big New York publisher, their churn rate is very high. They don't really care so much about backlist unless you've got a very, very strong seller. So that book went out of print and I took back the rights. And then I went to Morgan James and did Guerrilla Marketing to Heal the World. So by doing the self-published book, I had leverage with Wiley, and I also had a much easier time creating the next book manuscript because 60% of it was already written. And ditto with Morgan James, I actually had to chop out some of the Marketing 101 stuff that was in the 2 earlier versions because I wrote so much about the social change side that they said it's too big, we have to cut. So that's what I chose to take out. But interestingly enough, that was really the second time that I went through almost the identical process, because here, my general marketing books started with this very silly self-published book in 1985 that was done, I kid you not, on an Apple ImageWriter dot matrix printer for the mass. I made every mistake in self-publishing you could make. This was my first self-published book out of 5. And it was a disaster in terms of what I didn't know. And I should have gone looking for advice, but I was, how old was I when that book came out? I was not yet 30. So there was a lot of stuff I didn't know yet. But I was able to parlay that book into my Simon & Schuster classic, Marketing Without Megabucks, How to Sell Anything on a Shoestring. And this book really had a lot to do with establishing my reputation. This book didn't sell enormous numbers of copies, but it did sell several thousand, and it sold to a lot of influencers in the marketing world. And then when they took that one out of print, and I got back the rights, then I went to a small publisher called Chelsea Green. I actually met the publisher on the floor of Book Expo America. It was, I think, my second time going to the show. I've been to about 15 or 20 of them now. And I remember taking you around to one of those, actually, years ago.
I remember that.
So they did a revised, expanded version of Marketing Without Megabucks with 9 chapters instead of 7 pages about online marketing. And that was Grassroots Marketing Getting Noticed in a Noisy World, which came out in 2000. So I've gone through this cycle twice now of going from self-published to big publisher to small publisher. And for me, it seems to work well. It also means that I can say I'm a 10-book author when really 4 of those books were incorporated into later books.
Nice. As we close up here, what final advice do you have for authors who want to create a movement?
Well, first of all, think about what your movement is going to be and who you need to empower to be part of your movement, and what they listen to, what they look at, how do you reach them? What organizations are they involved with? And you won't necessarily find the model of how to do that on my website, which is goingbeyondsustainability.com, but you will see how I'm trying to do it in the niche that I've gone for of building a movement within the mainstream business community to embrace environment and social change. And also on that site, on the freebies page, you can actually get a 15-minute consultation with me where we can explore how social change and green principles can integrate with your particular skills, expertise, knowledge, and market, and what kinds of products and services you might develop, whether it's a book or something else, that really can move that forward. And a movement can be many things. Harley Davidson has created a movement of bikers. That's not a movement I'm particularly interested in helping to build, but it proves that you can do things even in the business context. Apple is another great example that they create hugely loyal fans who will buy anything they put out and buy it first and expensively, and then build from there into the mainstream market. And there are a lot of books that have changed the marketing world. I think of the 10,000 Fans. Was it Kevin Kelly who wrote that? 1,000 True Fans is one. Certainly some of Seth Godin's books have really changed the culture about marketing. I know that I really have a debt as a copywriter to a man named Jeffrey Lant, who self-published a number of books in the 80s and early 90s that totally turned around how I thought about marketing. And he was not building a movement, but he helped me build my movement because I had the skills to get noticed.
Definitely. And tell us, what is your latest book, because you've gone through so many books? What is the latest book that we should be looking at?
That's The Guerrilla Marketing to Heal the World.
Fantastic.
There's also a sampler from that on goingbeyondsustainability.com.
Excellent. Great. Thank you very much for being with us today, Shel.
Been a pleasure. Nice to see you again.
Thank you for listening to the Write Your Book in a Flash podcast with Dan Janelle, the only podcast that shows you exactly how people just like you have built their businesses by writing a book. If you'd like to write your book but don't know where to start, you can find great information at writeyourbookinaflash.com. If you're ready to take your next step to write the book that can transform your business, I invite you to schedule a free, no-obligation consulting call with me by going to writeyourbookinaflash.com. We'll be back next week with another insightful interview to help you become a top business leader.